There are no positives. There are no assurances. Family breakdown can occur, and it doesn't mean that you're automatically going to take drugs, right? So it depends on the individuals within that family and what has been happening. There are links to dysfunctional relationships, and when you talk to people who do treatment of young boys mostly, who come in around 15 or 16 with addiction problems, most of the damage occurred when they were 5, 4 and 3. So, but this doesn't mean you may have a breakdown in your relationship, in your family, that it means that the person is going to turn to drugs. It depends on how resilient they are, it depends on how supportive you are. A whole lot of other factors are involved in this. And it's not just one risk factor. What the evidence tells us is the more of these risk factors you have, the higher the likelihood. This is not a hard science, it's not physics. It's social science.
Psychology.
Based on the statistical averages, this is what we can say. The higher the likelihood. But you just need to be aware of that. So a family breakdown will occur, and therefore you just need to be mindful and protective of each other through that process.
It's about a person's resilience, and having that resilience and skills so young people can cope, and family members can cope when there is a marriage breakdown, because not everyone does turn to drugs at all.
No. And so just to elaborate on what's been already said, being a clinically trained psychologist, I do tend to pathologise, and so it's good that people are talking about resilience and protective factors. But when as a psychologist, when I'm assessing somebody who's having who's presenting with an alcohol or other drug use issue, and often with a co-occurring mental health issue, we look at predisposing factors, and that's what Julie was talking about in terms of, you know, there might have been some early trauma, there could be some genetic predisposing factors, but then the family breakdown could be a precipitating factor. But there are a number of factors, there are a number of things that could precipitate the onset of the person's presenting issue. So it may be loss of a job, it may be, I've already said loss of a job, but redundancy. It may be the death of a loved one. There are just an infinite number of factors that can precipitate the onset of these issues.
It's almost like snakes and ladders, really, isn't it? I mean, you've got protective factors that help people flourish, and then you've got the snake that kind of throws them at the bottom.
Yeah, and it's a very delicate balance with the predisposing factors and the protective factors, and another way of looking at it is called the diathesis stress model. And what it is, it's the analogy is it's like a glass, and we all have a glass with a certain amount, that's a certain size, and that's about as much as we can take. That's our capacity. And during life, bits of water get poured in that glass. Eventually, if too much water is poured in that glass, it spills out, and it might spill out in the form of depression or anxiety or alcohol and other drug use or problems.
Look, I was just going to offer the view, broadly supporting what people are saying, is that disadvantage generally is associated with alcohol and other drug harms and so forth. There's studies done by a fellow called Tony Vincent, who's a fairly clever chap from New South Wales, who looks at postcodes by disadvantage and harms by disadvantage, and I think it's something like 6% of the postcodes in Victoria foster about 50% of the prison population. It's some horrible statistic like that, and you'd find that replicated in alcohol and other drug harms. And so Steve's Rat Park, some of the other suggestions here with regard to really building the strength of the communities, building the capacity of the communities is absolutely crucial. Something which I'd suggest to do, and I know there are a few politicians here, including one on the panel, is write to your politicians. One written letter to a politician is probably equivalent to about 100 emails, according to their staffers. You might be able to correct me on that, Bruce. But that's certainly, they want to hear this stuff. They want to hear what the problems are. They want to hear ideas on fixing the community. They want to be able to take those ideas to Parliament, you know, and make sure they get this stuff across the board and really start to address some of these serious issues of disadvantage.